Emma Bennett clutched her small backpack tighter as she stepped through the gleaming glass doors of Westbrook Enterprises. At just 10 years old, she seemed impossibly tiny against the towering marble columns and sleek modern furniture of the corporate lobby. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, drawing curious glances from suited executives hurrying past. Though her clothes were clean, the careful patches on her jeans and the slightly faded color of her best sweater told a story of careful preservation rather than prosperity. "Can I help you, young lady?" The receptionist's perfectly arched eyebrow conveyed polite skepticism as Emma approached the imposing front desk. "I need to see Mr. Westbrook, please," Emma said, her voice small but determined. "It's important." The receptionist's smile turned indulgent. "I'm afraid Mr. Westbrook is extremely busy today. Perhaps your parents could call and schedule an appointment." Emma stood straighter, her chin lifting with resolve. "Please, it's about my mom. Her voice caught, but she pushed through. "She passed away last week. Before she died, she told me to find him. She said to tell him that she had the same tattoo as him." Something in Emma's earnest expression made the receptionist pause. Her eyes softened with compassion for the child clearly dealing with grief beyond her years. "Wait here," she finally said, picking up her phone. 20 minutes later, Emma found herself sitting in a cavernous office on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of the city, but her attention was fixed on the man behind the massive desk. James Westbrook, 42, was exactly as intimidating as his magazine covers suggested. His tailored charcoal suit couldn't quite hide the athletic build beneath, and his intense blue eyes seemed to evaluate everything with precision. When he gestured while speaking on the phone, Emma caught a glimpse of his wrist, where an intricate pattern peeked out from beneath his shirt cuff. "So," his deep voice broke the silence after he ended his call, "I'm told you wanted to see me about a tattoo." Emma nodded, suddenly finding her rehearsed speech evaporating under his gaze. "My mum had one like yours," she finally managed, pointing to his wrist. "She said before she died that I should find the man with the matching tattoo." A flicker of something, recognition, alarm, crossed his face, gone so quickly Emma couldn't be sure she'd seen it. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Claire Bennett." The name hung in the air between them. James Westbrook's expression remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of his desk. "And where is your father?" Emma stared at her hands. "I never had one. It was always just me and Mom." After a moment of heavy silence, James pressed an intercom button. "Cancel my meetings for the afternoon," he instructed, then turned back to Emma. "I think we need to talk, but not here. Would you like some lunch?" An hour later, they sat in a quiet corner of an upscale cafe, their untouched food growing cold between them. Emma had shown him the photograph she carried, her mother, younger and smiling, with the same intricate tattoo visible on her wrist. "We met in college," James finally said, his voice distant with memory. "We were young, in love, and impossibly idealistic. We got matching tattoos one weekend, ancient Celtic symbols that meant eternal bond. But then my father died suddenly. I had to take over the company and Claire." He trailed off, lost in thoughts he seemed reluctant to share. "She said you would have been a good dad," Emma offered quietly. "She wasn't mad at you. She just wanted me to find you after she was gone." James looked up, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "How did she die?" "Cancer. It happened fast. The doctors tried, but—" Emma blinked rapidly against the tears threatening to fall. "Where are you staying now?" "With Mrs. Winters, our neighbor. She's nice, but she's old and has her grandchildren visiting soon. The social worker is coming tomorrow to take me somewhere else." James was silent for a long moment, studying Emma's face as if searching for something. "You have her eyes," he finally said, "and her chin, that determined look." Before Emma could respond, his phone rang. He answered it, spoke briefly, then stood. "I need to handle something at the office. I'd like you to come back with me if that's all right." Emma nodded, confusion mingling with a strange sense of hope. As they walked back toward the towering Westbrook building, James slowed his long strides to match her pace. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he explained. "My sister Grace runs our legal department. She'll need to verify some things, make some calls. I hope that's okay." The afternoon passed in a blur as Emma sat in Grace Westbrook's elegant office, answering questions and watching the sophisticated woman make phone calls. Papers were signed, Voices were occasionally raised in adjoining rooms, and twice Emma heard James mention something about paternity test and guardianship options. As evening approached, Emma found herself back in James's office, worry beginning to creep in. What if he didn't want her? What if he sent her away now that he knew who she was? "Emma," James finally said, coming to sit beside her rather than behind his imposing desk. "I've spoken with Mrs. Winters and your social worker. I've explained that I might be your father. They've agreed to let you stay with me temporarily while we sort everything out officially. If you want to, that is." Emma's heart hammered in her chest. "You want me to live with you?" "I do," he said, a gentleness in his voice that hadn't been there before. "I have a lot to learn about being a father, and I can't replace your mother, but I'd like the chance to try if you'll let me." For the first time that day, Emma smiled, a small tentative curve of her lips that nevertheless reached her eyes. "Mum said you were a good man who just got lost in a big world. I think she'd be happy." As they left the building together, Emma noticed James unconsciously touching the tattoo on his wrist, the eternal bond that had, against all odds, brought them together. The sprawling penthouse apartment felt like another planet compared to the cozy two-bedroom apartment Emma had shared with her mother. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a twinkling cityscape. The furniture was pristine white, and the kitchen gleamed with appliances Emma had only seen in magazines. She stood in the center of the guest bedroom, now her bedroom, clutching her small suitcase containing everything she owned in the world. "Is it okay?" James asked from the doorway, uncertainty in his voice. Gone was the commanding CEO from earlier that day, replaced by a man clearly out of his depth. "It's bigger than our whole apartment was," Emma said softly, running her hand over the plush comforter. "Do you live here all alone?" James nodded. "I work late most nights. Never found much reason to come home." He hesitated. "We can redecorate if you want, make it feel more yours." An awkward silence fell between them, strangers connected by grief, DNA, and matching tattoos they hadn't chosen. "I should let you get settled," James finally said. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, will be here in the morning. She can help you with anything you need." Emma nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. As James turned to leave, she blurted out, "Why didn't you ever look for my mom again?" He froze, his back to her. "I did," he admitted after a long pause. 3 years after we broke up, but she'd moved away, changed her number. No one knew where she'd gone." He turned, his expression somber. "If I'd known about you, Emma, I would have never stopped looking." That night, as Emma lay in the unfamiliar bed, she clutched the worn photograph of her mother to her chest and cried until sleep finally claimed her. The next morning, Grace Westbrook arrived with a team of professionals, a lawyer, a doctor for the paternity test, and a child psychologist. Emma sat through their questions and examinations with stoic determination, answering truthfully but volunteering little. "She's remarkably resilient," the psychologist told James afterward, unaware that Emma could hear them from the hallway. "But she's experienced significant trauma and upheaval. She'll need stability, patience, and time to adjust." "I don't know the first thing about raising a child," James admitted, his voice strained. "None of us do until we do it," Grace replied gently. "But James, are you sure about this? Your lifestyle, the company demands—" "She's my daughter, Grace. If those tests confirm what I already know in my gut, nothing else matters." Emma slipped away before they could discover her eavesdropping, a complicated mix of emotions churning inside her. Part of her longed for the simple life with her mother, school, their Friday movie nights, the small traditions that had defined her world. But another part felt a strange connection to this man who shared her blood and her mother's memories. Over the next week, Emma and James circled each other cautiously. He arranged for her to finish the school year at her current school, hiring a driver to take her each day. He came home earlier than usual, awkwardly attempting to help with homework and make conversation over takeout dinners. The paternity test results came back positive, surprising no one. The legal proceedings to establish guardianship began, with Grace handling everything with brisk efficiency. "Your mom kept a lot of secrets," James said one evening, as they sat in uncomfortable silence over Thai food. "I wish I understood why." Emma pushed her noodles around her plate. "She said you had important things to do in the world, that you were meant for big things and she would just hold you back." James set down his fork with a clatter. "She said that? That's why she left?" Emma nodded. She said you had a destiny to fulfill, and she didn't fit in it. A flash of anger crossed his face. That wasn't her decision to make. Were you really going to give up running your family's company to travel the world with her? Emma asked directly, repeating what her mother had often said during late-night reminiscences. The question seemed to catch him off guard. I would have found a way to make it work, he said finally, though uncertainty tinged his voice. The following Saturday, James took Emma to his office again. The weekend skeleton crew stared openly as the notorious workaholic CEO guided a small girl through the executive floor. He showed her photographs on the wall, explaining the company's history and his family's legacy. This was my father's office before it was mine, James explained, and his father's before that. Westbrook Enterprises has been in our family for 4 generations. It's important to you, Emma observed, studying his face. It was everything to me, he admitted. Until last week. Later that afternoon, while James was on a business call, Emma wandered into Grace's office where the elegant woman was catching up on weekend work. He's trying, Grace said without preamble. He doesn't know how to be a father, but he's trying. I don't know how to be a daughter to someone like him either, Emma confessed. Grace's professional demeanor softened. My brother wasn't always like this. All business and no life. After your mother left, something changed in him. He poured everything into the company as if trying to fill a hole. Mom always said he had a good heart hidden under all his success, Emma said quietly. She was right about that. Grace hesitated. There's something you should know, Emma. Your mother contacted James's office once about 8 years ago. Emma's eyes widened. She did. She never told me. She spoke to his assistant at the time, asked if he was happy, if he had married. When she heard he was engaged to the daughter of another business mogul, she hung up. She never identified herself. He was engaged? This was news to Emma. It fell apart 3 months later. James said his heart wasn't in it, but he never elaborated. Grace gave Emma a meaningful look. I've always wondered if he was still in love with someone from his past. The revelation rattled inside Emma's mind all weekend. Her mother had checked on James, had perhaps stepped back again when she thought he had moved on with his life. The complexity of adult relationships felt impossibly confusing. On Monday, Emma came home from school to find James unexpectedly waiting in the apartment. His normally immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened. I had Mrs. Sullivan get these, he said awkwardly, gesturing to art supplies spread across the dining table. You mentioned you liked to draw like your mom did. You remembered that? Emma asked, surprised. I'm trying to remember everything you tell me, he admitted. I have a lot of catching up to do. As they sat together, Emma tentatively sketching while James attempted his own clumsy drawing, she finally asked the question that had been burning inside her since Grace's revelation. Why didn't you ever get married or have other kids? James's hand stilled over his paper. When he looked up, the carefully constructed walls he maintained seemed momentarily transparent. I think I was waiting, he said simply. I just didn't know what for until you walked into my office with your mother's eyes and my stubborn chin. For the first time since entering his world, Emma felt something uncoil inside her, a knot of tension giving way to a fragile hope that perhaps this unlikely pair of strangers might someday become family. A week later, Emma was helping Mrs. Sullivan unpack groceries when she discovered a stack of old photographs the housekeeper had retrieved from storage. Among them was a faded picture of a younger James with his arm around a beautiful woman with familiar eyes. Her mother. They were so happy back then, Mrs. Sullivan commented, noticing Emma's discovery. I worked for Mr. Westbrook's father when your parents were dating. They lit up every room they entered together. What were they like? Emma asked eagerly. Mrs. Sullivan smiled fondly. Your mother was sunshine, warm, bright, full of dreams and ideas. And your father, well, before he became Mr. Westbrook, CEO, he was just Jamie, a young man who laughed easily and talked about changing the world. Emma studied the photograph, trying to reconcile this carefree couple with her soft-spoken, struggling mother and the stern, reserved man who was now her guardian. What happened to them? She whispered. Mrs. Sullivan patted her hand gently. Life, dear. Responsibilities, expectations, fear. Sometimes the hardest thing is believing you deserve happiness. That evening, when James returned home, Emma was waiting with the photograph. He stopped short when he saw it, his briefcase slipping from his fingers to the floor. Where did you find that? He asked quietly. Mrs. Sullivan had it, Emma explained, watching his face carefully. She said you used to be different, that you and Mom were happy. James took the photograph with careful hands, as if it might disintegrate at his touch. We were, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I've never been that happy since. For a moment, the mask of the powerful CEO vanished completely, leaving just a man mourning lost opportunities and second chances that had come too late. The tentative peace between Emma and James faced its first real test 3 weeks after she moved in. Emma was adapting to her new school, making a few cautious friendships, while James had rearranged his schedule to be home most evenings. They had established a fragile routine that, while not entirely comfortable, felt increasingly stable. That stability shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when Emma returned from school to find an elegant woman seated in the penthouse living room. Tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed in designer clothes, she exuded the same aura of wealth and privilege as James. "You must be Emma," the woman said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Vivian Harrington, an old friend of James's." Before Emma could respond, James emerged from his home office, his expression tight with barely controlled tension. "Vivian, I told you this isn't a good time," he said, moving to stand protectively near Emma. "And yet here I am," Vivian replied smoothly, her gaze returning to Emma with unconcealed curiosity. "I simply had to meet the child everyone is whispering about. The secret daughter who appeared out of nowhere." Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and confusion. "People are talking about me?" James shot Vivian a warning glance before turning to Emma. "Why don't you start your homework in your room? I need to speak with Miss Harrington privately." Though reluctant, Emma retreated to her bedroom, but left the door cracked open. The adults' voices drifted down the hallway, growing increasingly heated. "What were you thinking coming here unannounced?" James demanded. "What was I thinking? What were you thinking, James?" Vivian's voice rose slightly. "We've been negotiating this merger for 6 months, and suddenly you're cancelling meetings and rearranging the entire deal because you found out you have a daughter. The Harrington-Westbrook merger is worth billions. My personal life is not your concern, Vivian. That becomes my concern when your father and my father planned this merger for years, when our companies and our families were supposed to unite. When we were supposed to—" "That was my father's plan, not mine," James interrupted firmly. "I've only ever seen you as a business partner." A tense silence followed. "It's because of her mother, isn't it?" Vivian finally asked, her voice colder. "That woman from college you never got over. I knew it the moment our engagement failed. You've been waiting for her all these years." Emma leaned closer to the door, hardly daring to breathe. "Claire is gone," James said quietly. "But Emma is here, and she's my priority now. The board won't like this distraction. They're already questioning your commitment. Let them question. I've given 20 years of my life to Westbrook Enterprises. I won't give up my daughter, too." The conversation eventually ended with Vivian's departure, but the damage was done. When James came to check on Emma, he found her sitting on her bed, clutching her mother's photograph. "How much did you hear?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. "Enough," Emma whispered. "Are you in trouble because of me?" James sighed deeply. "No, Emma. I'm in trouble because I've spent years making the company my whole life, and now I'm changing the rules." He paused. "The company board, people who help me make decisions, they're concerned about the merger with Vivian's family business. It's a big deal that's been planned for a long time." "You should do it then," Emma said with childlike practicality. "Mom always said business had to come first for important people like you." A flash of pain crossed James's face. "Your mother was wrong about that. I'm sorry she ever felt that way." The next morning, James received an urgent call that took him to the office before Emma awoke. When she arrived home from school, she found not James but Grace waiting, her expression somber. "Your father's in an emergency board meeting," Grace explained. "There's been some complications with the company." "Because of me?" Emma asked directly. Grace considered her answer carefully. "Partly. The board is concerned about James's changing priorities and the Harrington merger failing. But there's more to it." She hesitated. "Emma, do you know what your mother did for work?" The question caught Emma off guard. "She was an artist. She painted and sold her work in galleries sometimes." "Before that," Grace pressed gently, "when she knew James in college." Emma shook her head, confused. Grace took a deep breath. "Your mother was studying environmental science. She was brilliant and passionate about protecting natural resources. After she left James, she joined an environmental advocacy group. that focused on corporate responsibility. Okay, Emma said slowly, not understanding the significance. One of the companies they investigated and publicly criticized was Westbrook Enterprises. Grace watched Emma's face carefully. They published reports about some of our older manufacturing plants and their environmental impact. It caused considerable trouble for the company about 7 years ago. Emma's eyes widened. My mom fought against James's company? She never used her connection to James or revealed their past. She worked under a different name professionally. But yes, she was part of a team that exposed some uncomfortable truths about Westbrook's environmental practices. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Did James know? Is that why he never found us? He didn't know it was her, Grace said firmly. Not until yesterday when Vivian brought it to his attention. She had investigators looking into your mother's background after she learned about you. Emma's mind raced with implications. Is James angry? He's complicated, Grace admitted. But mostly I think he's sad that your mother felt she had to fight him from the outside rather than telling him her concerns directly. When James finally returned home that evening, his exhaustion was evident in the shadows beneath his eyes and the slump of his shoulders. He found Emma in the living room, surrounded by her mother's old journals that Mrs. Sullivan had retrieved from storage. I read about the company, Emma said without preamble. Mom wrote that Westbrook Enterprises was polluting rivers and hurting people in small towns. James nodded slowly, loosening his tie as he sat across from her. Some of our older factories had serious problems. Your mother's group was right to call attention to it. He met her eyes directly. What she did was brave, Emma. Difficult, but brave. You're not mad at her? I wish she'd told me, he said quietly. I wish she'd trusted me enough to come to me directly. I would have listened. Emma turned the pages of her mother's journal. She wrote that she was afraid you'd think she was just trying to use your relationship to influence the company, that you wouldn't believe she really cared about the issues. James closed his eyes briefly, pain etched across his features. We both made so many assumptions about each other. We built walls based on what we thought the other person would think or do instead of actually talking. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. James answered to find Vivian and an older man Emma had never seen before. James, my father insisted on coming, Vivian said, her expression tense. Harold Harrington, Vivian's father, was a formidable figure, despite his 70 years. He strode into the apartment with the confidence of someone unused to being denied. So this is the child, he remarked, assessing Emma with cold calculation. The daughter of the environmental activist who nearly tanked your stock 7 years ago. Watch yourself, Harold, James warned, his voice dropping dangerously. She's 10 years old, and my daughter. And apparently the reason you're throwing away everything our families have worked toward, Harold countered. The board is in an uproar. 3 members have already suggested a vote of no confidence in your leadership. Emma, feeling suddenly protective of James, stepped forward. My mum said companies should clean up their messes. She said good people do the right thing, even when it's hard. The room fell silent at her words. James looked at Emma with a mix of pride and sorrow, while Harold Harrington's face darkened with anger. Out of the mouths of babes, he said coldly. Well, James, you have a choice to make. Your father's legacy or this new family situation. The board meeting tomorrow will determine whether you remain CEO. I suggest you consider your priorities carefully. After they left, Emma turned to James, her eyes wide with worry. Are you going to lose your company because of me? James knelt to meet her gaze. Listen to me, Emma. Whatever happens tomorrow, you are not responsible. These are adult problems with a long history. Your mother did what she believed was right, and now I need to do the same. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she crept into the living room to find James still awake, surrounded by papers and his laptop glowing in the darkness. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening. I found something, Emma said hesitantly, holding out one of her mother's journals. I think you should see it. The page she'd marked contained not just writing, but a sketch, a detailed rendering of James from years ago, laughing in the sunlight. Beside it, her mother had written, he could have changed the world if he'd believed in himself more than his father's expectations. I hope our child has his determination and vision, but sees beyond profit to purpose. James stared at the words for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, a revelation dawning that would change everything between them. Your mother was right, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I stopped believing in myself a long time ago. I became what was expected of me, not who I wanted to be." Emma sat quietly beside him. "What did you want to be?" A smile, genuine and reminiscent of the young man in her mother's drawings, crossed his face. "Your mother and I had dreams of combining business with environmental protection, ways to make companies profitable while caring for the planet. We had so many ideas." He trailed off, lost in memory. "Could you still do that?" Emma asked. James looked at the journal again, then at Emma. "Maybe I can. Maybe that's what all of this has been leading to." The next morning, James dressed carefully in his best suit, but rather than heading to the office, he spent an hour on the phone with Grace. By the time he ended the call, there was a determined set to his jaw that Emma hadn't seen before. "I have a board meeting at 10, he told Emma. "I'd like you to stay here with Mrs. Sullivan. I might be late coming home." "Are they going to fire you?" Emma asked bluntly. James smiled, surprising her. "They might try, but I think I finally have something worth fighting for." After James left, Emma spent the day anxiously waiting for news. Mrs. Sullivan tried to distract her with baking and art projects, but Emma's thoughts remained with James, imagining him facing down the board members who wanted to remove him. It was past dinner time when James finally returned home. Emma rushed to meet him at the door, searching his face for signs of defeat or victory. "What happened?" she demanded. James smiled, a tired but satisfied expression. "I stood my ground. I told them I was establishing the Westbrook Environmental Foundation as a major initiative of the company, dedicated to cleaning up our environmental impact and creating sustainable business practices." He bent to her level. "And I told them it would be named in honor of your mother." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? And they agreed?" "Not all of them," James admitted. Harold Harrington and his allies were furious. "There was a vote." He paused, building suspense. "And?" Emma prompted impatiently. "And I'm still CEO by 2 votes. It seems your mother's research had quietly convinced more board members than anyone realized. They've been waiting years for leadership brave enough to address it." Relief flooded through Emma, followed by pride. "So you're not going to lose the company?" "Not today," James said, ruffling her hair, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "But more importantly, I think I'm finally going to run it the way it should have been run all along, the way your mother would have wanted." 6 months passed, bringing profound changes to both the Westbrook penthouse and its occupants. The stark white walls now displayed colorful artwork, some purchased from local artists, others created by Emma herself. Photographs of Claire shared space with Westbrook family portraits, and the formerly sterile space had become unmistakably a home. Emma had settled into her new school, made friends, and even started a student environmental club with James's enthusiastic support. The court had finalized James's adoption of Emma, making official what they had both felt from the beginning. They were family, bound by more than just DNA and matching tattoos. The Westbrook Environmental Foundation had launched with considerable media attention, focusing first on cleaning up the very manufacturing sites Claire's research had identified. Several of her former colleagues now worked with the foundation, bringing their expertise and passion to an initiative that had the resources to create meaningful change. On a crisp autumn Saturday, James and Emma visited Claire's grave together. Emma placed a bouquet of wildflowers, while James stood quietly beside her. "I've been thinking about something Mrs. Sullivan said," Emma remarked as they walked back toward the car, "about how you and Mom used to light up rooms when you were together." James smiled sadly. "We did. Your mother had this energy about her. She made everything feel more alive, more meaningful." "She would be happy now, I think," Emma said, slipping her hand into his, a gesture that had become natural over the months. "Seeing the foundation and what you're doing with the company." "I hope so," James replied softly. "I wish she could have seen it. I wish we hadn't wasted so many years with misunderstandings." As they drove home, Emma noticed a subtle tension in James's demeanor. He seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at her as if working up the courage to say something important. "Everything okay?" she finally asked as they pulled into the building's garage. James took a deep breath. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about. Something important." He turned off the engine but made no move to exit the car. "I've met someone." Emma blinked, surprised not by the news itself, but by the nervous way he delivered it. "You mean like a girlfriend?" "Not quite yet," he clarified quickly. "Her name is Olivia. She's a professor of environmental science at the university. We've been working together on the foundation initiatives, and we've had dinner a few times. Emma studied his face carefully. Do you like her? Like more than just work? James nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. I do. But Emma, nothing will happen if you're not comfortable with it. You come first now, always. To his surprise, Emma grinned. Is she the one with the curly hair who came to the office last week? The one who argued with you about the river cleanup project? That's her, James admitted with a chuckle. She reminds me a bit of your mother, passionate about her causes and not intimidated by me at all. Mom would approve, Emma declared confidently. She always said you needed someone who wouldn't let you hide in your office and forget to live. Relief washed over James's face. So you'd be okay if I invited her to dinner sometime at home? Emma nodded. As long as she knows I get to ask questions too. I need to make sure she's good enough for you. James laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that Emma had only recently begun to hear. Deal. 2 weeks later, Emma peered around the corner of the kitchen as James prepared for Olivia's first visit to their home. He was uncharacteristically nervous, checking the dinner he'd cooked himself, with considerable coaching from Mrs. Sullivan, and adjusting the flowers on the table repeatedly. When Olivia arrived, Emma watched their interaction with keen interest. Olivia Matthews was nothing like Vivian Harrington. Where Vivian had been ice and sharp edges, Olivia was warmth and genuine smiles. She spoke to Emma not as a child to be humored, but as a person with valid thoughts and feelings. During dinner, Emma observed how Olivia and James debated ideas energetically but respectfully, their mutual admiration evident beneath their academic disagreements. Most importantly, Olivia made James laugh, that full, unguarded laugh that had once been so rare. So, Emma, Olivia said as they shared dessert, your father tells me you're starting an environmental club at school. That's impressive for someone your age. It was my mom's thing first, Emma explained. I just wanted to continue it somehow. Olivia's expression softened. Your mother's work was groundbreaking. I actually used her research papers in my graduate courses. Emma's eyes widened. You knew about her work? Many of us in the field did, Olivia confirmed. She published under Bennett Roberts, but her insights were distinctive. When your father mentioned who she was, I realized the connection immediately. Her research on watershed protection changed how many of us approach conservation work. Later, as they sat in the living room, Olivia noticed the photograph of Claire on the shelf. She was beautiful, Olivia remarked. I can see where you get your eyes, Emma. James watched their interaction with quiet contentment. This was nothing like the awkward, tension-filled evenings with business associates or the calculated social climbers who had pursued him over the years. This felt real, comfortable, right. As the evening wound down, Emma excused herself to her room, but lingered in the hallway long enough to see James walk Olivia to the door. Their goodbye was soft-spoken, their brief kiss tentative, but full of promise. Later, James came to tuck Emma in, something that had become their nightly ritual. What did you think? He asked, smoothing her blanket. I like her, Emma said decisively, and she likes you. Not CEO James Westbrook, but you. James smiled. The lines of stress that had marked his face for years somehow softened now. You know, when you walked into my office that day and mentioned your mother's tattoo, I thought my world was being turned upside down. He touched the Celtic pattern on his wrist thoughtfully. I didn't realize it was actually turning right side up for the first time in 20 years. The weeks that followed brought more dinners with Olivia, museum outings, and even a weekend trip to a mountain cabin where they hiked, fished, and made s'mores around a campfire. Emma watched with satisfaction as James gradually shed the stiff formality that had defined him for so long, becoming more present, more alive. 3 months later, a small but significant change appeared in the penthouse. A drawer in James's bathroom that held Olivia's toiletries, a space in his closet for a few of her clothes. Emma noticed but said nothing, privately pleased by the development. On the 1-year anniversary of Emma's arrival in James's life, they held a small celebration. Mrs. Sullivan baked a cake, Grace brought champagne and sparkling cider for Emma, and Olivia arrived with her arms full of wildflowers, Claire's favorite. I have something for both of you, James announced after dinner. He handed Emma a small box first. Inside, she found a delicate silver bracelet. Engraved on its surface was the same Celtic knot pattern from the tattoo that had brought them together. It means eternal bond, James reminded her softly, the connection that can never be broken. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she fastened it around her wrist. It's perfect, she whispered. Then James turned to Olivia, dropping unexpectedly to one knee. The room fell silent as he produced a small velvet box. I wasted 20 years because I was afraid to follow my heart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to waste another day. He opened the box to reveal a ring with an elegant emerald surrounded by diamonds. Olivia, will you marry me? Olivia's breath caught, her eyes glistening. Are you sure? She asked, glancing meaningfully at Emma. Emma stepped forward, slipping her hand into Olivia's. We're both sure, she said firmly. Then yes, Olivia breathed, allowing James to slide the ring onto her finger before pulling both him and Emma into a tight embrace. Later that night, as Emma drifted towards sleep, she felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known since before her mother's illness. Through her partially open door, she could hear James and Olivia speaking softly in the living room, their conversation punctuated by quiet laughter. On her nightstand, the photograph of her mother seemed to glow softly in the dim light from the hallway. Emma could almost imagine Claire smiling in approval as the family she'd helped create, in ways she could never have foreseen, found its way toward happiness. You were right, Mum, Emma whispered to the photograph. He just needed to remember who he really was. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars against the night sky. Emma thought about the matching Celtic knots, the one on her new bracelet, the one inked permanently on James's wrist, the one that had been on her mother's skin, symbols of an eternal bond that had endured separation, misunderstanding, and even death, a bond that had ultimately brought healing, redemption, and an unexpected second chance at love. As sleep finally claimed her, Emma's last conscious thought was that some stories don't end when you think they do. Sometimes they just take unexpected detours before finding their way to exactly where they were always meant to be.